Out on third reading, House Bill 1106. The clerk will read the bill.
HB 1106 by Shaheen relating to the definition of abuse or neglect of a child.
Chair recognizes Mr. Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, HB 1106 makes it clear in statute that's not considered abuse or neglect for a parent to refer to a child's true sex. Move passage.
The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Collier.
Chair recognizes Ms. Collier to explain her amendment. The amendment is withdrawn. Anyone wishing to speak on, for, or against House Bill 1106? Chair recognizes Ms. A. Davis to speak against the bill.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Speaker and members. I have sincere concerns for this bill as it opens the door for mistreatment and abuse of our children. In each of the cases mentioned as precedent, there was severe, heartbreaking abuse involved. The children were not removed simply because their parents refused to affirm their gender identity. In the case mentioned in Indiana, the child had an eating disorder so severe that doctors were concerned about their brain health. In Arizona, a heartbreaking case, that child was not removed because the parents didn't affirm their gender identity. The child was removed because the child confessed that the older brother had been molesting the child in the household since the child was 7 years old. That's why the child was removed. If we allow a bill like this to happen, does this open the door for more abuse for children like we've seen? The precedents have all shown there is severe abuse happening in those households. It's not because of the affirmation. So I really hope we can come together and formulate a bill that does preserve parental rights, but I also want to make sure we prioritize the safety of our children here in Texas.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the lady yield for a few
Lady
questions?
yield for questions.
I yield.
Lady yields.
Ms. Davis, would it be fair to say that CPS cases and family cases are extremely complex?
Absolutely. And in each of these cases, it wasn't just cut and dry. Those parents didn't want to affirm the gender identity. The child was taken away. It was a lot of abuse that was involved in each of those cases.
And on these kind of cases, DFPS and CPS on any of these states are unlikely to act in that extreme manner unless the allegations were severe.
Absolutely. And it even says in the court documents that the court doesn't believe a child should be taken away because of the parent's beliefs. It's when that abuse begins to harm the child emotionally and physically that those conversations start to happen about removal.
In fact, the standard of proof, like in Texas and in most other states, the standard of proof of removing a child from a family is clear and convincing evidence. It was just higher than normal civil law, which is almost to beyond a reasonable doubt.
Correct. And sadly, in a lot of these cases, it was the children who were telling people about the abuse that was happening to them and asking to be removed from these households.
Yeah. And so, does it seem like the advocates for this legislation are cherry picking what they want to see and hear and ignoring 99% of the remaining case?
I hope that we can come all together and formulate strong policies, strong bills, strong laws that do, like I say, protect parental rights, but this allows abuse of children without really identifying the true cause of what's going on in those households.
Would it be fair to say that the bill author, in deciding on these particular decisions using those incomplete cases, is sort of an arbitrary act?
I want to say in his testimony that my good friend, Representative Shaheen, he's coming from a good place. It's just the language in this bill is not strong enough to make sure it's actually protecting our children that are going through horrific circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Mr. Jones to speak in opposition.
Members, I thought a lot about an opposition speech to this legislation. And if I could just get y'all's attention just for a minute, I'd really appreciate it. I want to speak in a language that I know that you can all hear, and that's coming from the heart and being very personal. When I think about this bill, I think about my childhood, because this bill is not just impacting those who are a part of our body, but it impacts everyone to our very core. And so as a young boy, I knew that I was different, and other people knew that I was different. Some say I was a little softer. Some say I was a little funny acting. And this sometimes made me a target to unnecessary attention, and that was from loved ones. And as you think about this legislation, I hope that you never have to go through an experience of having the you beat out of you. Having a family member who is supposed to love you but want to beat something out of you that you have absolutely no control over. I want you to think about that as you give children, or as you take away from children the right to call for help when they need help. Because this bill is not just about refusing to use a child's preferred pronouns or express orientation. It's about not acknowledging that child's humanity when they are asking, when they are begging for help, because it is so much more behind that story. And so I just ask members, I beg you to please consider what this legislation is doing to our young people, because when they need help, they won't come to their parents when they need help, because they will be scared to death to ask for that help. They know that they need help and support from their parents, but they know that that could turn into a physical ordeal. That can be violence that will scar that
Mr.
child
Wally,
for the
for
rest
what
of their
purpose?
life.
Representative Jones, yield for a few questions.
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes.
The gentleman yields.
Representative, I was sitting at my desk and was moved by what you said. I just want to let you know that you're aware you're loved on this floor. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Every day.
Are you aware that you are loved because you are you?
That's right.
And many folks like you need to be proud of who they are. Is that correct?
Absolutely. They need to see that, and they need to be affirmed every day.
Let alone you, but many children in this state and across this country that struggle on a daily basis because of the doubt in their minds, because society has placed on them. But we love them. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And many of us have family members that are struggling through this. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We talk to them every day in this building.
And we need to love them for who they are. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we need to love them for who they love. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker?
Ms. Flores, for what purpose?
Yeah, would the gentleman yield for a
The gentleman yield for
question?
questions?
Yes, I will.
Gentleman yields.
Well, a comment too. Thank you so much for this, and I understand your pain. I just come back from a family situation, and my nephew is now transitioning to be my niece. And fortunately for her, she's got a very supportive and loving mom and dad and family. And it's not easy, because even with that support, he, back then, was struggling and dropped out of high school. Now that she has begun transitioning, is now very happy and is actually going back to college and talking about getting a degree in a future. So, you know, I understand what you're saying about needing that healthy environment, and some kids are fortunate, but not all kids are fortunate like that, are they?
Absolutely not. And there is data. There's tons of data. And even if you cannot see the data, please allow the lived experiences of people in this building to tell you that there's data that shows there are two roads to this story. And it's not just about supporting whether someone's LGBTQ or not. Again, it's about supporting their humanity. And we know that those things change people's lived experiences and their outcomes. The stories about suicide and attempted suicide, it is true. That is something that I tried when I was in the 6th grade.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rails.
That is something that I tried when I was in the 6th grade, when I thought that I had nobody to go to. When I went to my family members, the ones I still love to this very day, who did not understand me. And so even though I am not a part of the transgender community, my heart goes out to this community because I know what it feels like to be misunderstood to a level of incomprehension. And all you want to do, particularly from the people who are supposed to love and accept you, is just want them to be able to accept you for who you are. This is not about a title. This is about acceptance from that carnal family level, because we know whether you identify as LGBTQ or not, what this world will do to you when you do not have that love. And what we are doing with this legislation, and so I mean this with my heart. I am not trying to chub. I mean this with my heart. This legislation impacts me to my core. I hate this bill. And I just want you all to understand why people hate this bill. Because if you are taking the ability for children to advocate for themselves when they are in the homes that are supposed to be protecting them, abusing them, we are causing so much harm, everybody. Members, we are causing harm by this legislation. And I cannot be silent and let this happen.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for a
The
question?
gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Jones, I very much appreciate your passion on this. Have you, in your life, in your experience, met LGBTQ plus people who have been abused or kicked out of their home because they came out?
Absolutely. Not only in my personal life, but also my professional life. I used to run a youth drop-in center for LGBTQ youth and have to help people find showers, people find toiletries, people just get the basic needs to serve their lives when their families have turned their backs on them, literally kicking them out of their homes and not having somewhere to go, and them having to resort to sex work and other things just to survive. It's not just these cute things, it was survival. And that's what I have seen and experienced in my life and career.
And these are people who, if it were not for the fact that they were LGBTQ, that if it were not for that, they would be loved and supported by the family. And it's this one thing that is driving hate into their lives.
Absolutely. And this legislation only codifies that hate.
So, are you concerned that this legislation, if adopted, would give people who already are inclined to hurt their own children, the children that they would otherwise love and be supportive of, that this would give them permission to be more abusive?
Yes, and we have seen, and I not only share that story with you, but we have seen and we have heard from Representative Davis, who had to deal with this in her very committee, and hearing about the abuse. And when you just pull just one layer back of this story, you see the tons and tons of abuse that was attached to this story, the physical abuse, the mental abuse, the rape that happened. And these things are real, and especially when you are dealing with people who are LGBTQ, sometimes not having your own parents to talk to makes it feel like you can't talk to anybody, and people take advantage of that. So when we talk about predators, let's talk about the predators that are targeting our youth when they see this vulnerability. Let's believe those children when they come and talk about these things, especially when it's happening in their own damn house.
And can this abuse extend as far as murder? That a parent would kill their own child rather than deal with the idea that they might be a little bit different?
Yes, young people have been targets of violence, especially when we talk about young boys. Young boys being beat by their fathers who do not feel that they should be this way, and just going sometimes just too far. And these are the young people. Look up the stories of how many young people, young boys, have been harmed because they were just a little bit too soft or a little bit too feminine. Yes, this is something that happens, and it is for real in this state.
The gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Ms. Gonzalez to speak in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and thank you to my colleague and Vice Chair for sharing his personal story. I too myself experienced the same thing, got bullied, locker at school vandalized, my home vandalized, but I'm not gonna go into my personal story. I'm gonna share some stories that aren't from too long ago. And they're not from too far off countries either, like the author has referred to in his layout. They are from our communities. They are stories of the LGBTQIA children who were beaten, who were humiliated and killed, often by the very adults who are supposed to be protecting them. Their only offense being perceived as gay or feminine or just different. I'd like to begin telling you about Gabriel Fernandez. But before I do, I want to offer a clear content warning to those watching or listening that this story involves descriptions of child abuse, real child abuse, and I share them with the deepest respect for the gravity of this moment. But I also believe that this body cannot make informed decisions in the abstract. If we are to legislate on identity, on neglect, and family structures, then we must understand the real-world consequences, especially when those consequences are fatal. So with care and with purpose, I ask you to listen. In California, Gabriel Fernandez, age 8, he was tortured and killed for being gay. In one of the most gut-wrenching child abuse cases in recent memory, Gabriel Fernandez was murdered by his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend in 2013. And I'm gonna ask members to take their conversation outside the rails because they believed he was gay.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rails.
Gabriel was forced to wear girls' clothes, was beaten daily, shot with a BB gun, burned with cigarettes, and locked in a cabinet. In his final words, he had a cracked skull, broken ribs, missing teeth, and BB pellets embedded in his lungs. "Why don't you like me, Mommy?" Gabriel once asked. She never answered. This is the cost of teaching children that being gay is something to be punished. In Georgia, gay shaved into the boy's head on Instagram Live. Tyron Smith. In 2021, a horrifying video surfaced of a young black boy in Georgia being slapped, berated, and forcibly shaved by adults who believed he was acting gay. They carved the words gay into the side of his head and posted the abuse on Instagram Live. "You still doing gays? You still think this is cute?" One of the adults yells. 3 adults were arrested and charged with cruelty to children. This wasn't discipline, it was public humiliation and psychological torture, broadcast for likes. No charges were filed despite public outcry. A child's dignity was weaponized as content. Where was the protection there? In Texas, a father beats a 2-year-old for acting gay, Javon Thompson. In 2024, Javon Thompson, a Texas father, was sentenced to 45 years in prison for violently abusing his 2-year-old son, who claimed he was acting gay. Prosecutors described how Thompson repeatedly beat the toddler, leaving injuries so severe they required hospitalization. This was a hate crime against a toddler. In Milwaukee, a 1st grader was abused by a school principal for having 2 dads. In 2024, a federal lawsuit was filed alleging that a 1st grader in Milwaukee was subjected to repeated abuse by his school principal at Cesar Chavez Elementary School because he had 2 gay dads. The principal allegedly isolated him, denied him recess, and publicly mocked his family. They said, "My family's not real," he told his parents. He started begging not to go to school. Family rejection doesn't just happen at home, it's happening in our classrooms too. In another case, a young 10-year-old boy from California told his family he liked boys. Shortly after, he was tortured and murdered by his mother and her boyfriend in 2018. He was whipped with a belt burned, slammed on the ground, and forced to kneel on rice for hours. "I'll hurt you, but I still love you," he told his mother during the abuse. That was the last thing he ever said. The child died loving the people who tortured him. That's what shame and silence can do. These are not just isolated tragedies. They are connected by a culture that criminalizes and punishes queerness, especially in children. The children that this body always claims they're trying to protect. Every anti-LGBTQIA bill introduced, every book banned, every curriculum erased sends a message that it's okay to treat these kids like they're broken, like they won't belong, but our children are listening, and some of them won't survive the silence. So I ask you to let's really protect our kids. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Shaheen to close.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
Absolutely.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Shaheen, in the list of incidents that you refer to as the basis of this legislation, how many of those cases were from Texas?
There's been cases across the nation and across the state of Texas. I called out two from different states and one from the state of Texas. And then I also called out concern about actions of other legislatures that are making it the definition of abuse to not acknowledge a child's orientation and gender.
Now, I know we don't have this ability in other states, but did you know that as legislators we have the ability to request files, complete files, for these types of cases? Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. And did you request the files for these cases in Texas?
No, I just confirmed that there were allegations of abuse based on a parent's decision not to align with their child's gender identity.
And where did that information come from?
Multiple news sources.
Multiple news sources. Did you confirm it with the parents themselves?
No.
Okay. Did you confirm it with DFPS?
I read the articles, multiple articles that laid out that there were allegations of abuse merely because the parents held traditional values of what sex was.
And you understand that the news just reports what they're told, right?
Well, one was from the Texas Tribune, so it had to be right.
I'm sorry. You understand that the press reports what they're told, right? Like they say, the news articles say this
No,
person
that's inaccurate.
says.
No, the press will also look at legal documents. They'll source their information.
Did you look at the legal documents in the Texas cases?
I don't believe so. I think I just referenced the multiple articles where there were allegations of abuse.
Because normally, because this is what I practice on a day-to-day basis, these documents are sealed. These are confidential documents, and unless you're in the case, even other attorneys cannot have access to them. Did you ask how the press got a hold of them?
No, I just read the articles.
So you believe it's true because it was reported on and somebody said it.
I believe it's true because there's been multiple reports across the United States and in Texas of allegations of abuse and threats to parents of their children being removed because of that.
Did you ask DFPS to sit down with you and to go over the cases?
Normally when I read an article in the press, I don't typically reach out to the individuals that are involved to confirm the article. I just read the article.
I mean, DFPS is an arm of the state of Texas. They work for the state and they answer to you. Could you not have simply asked them, hey, what happened here?
When you read the same article from multiple resources, that typically is sufficient.
So that's curious because usually when I read an article and it all quotes the same source, I asked myself, is that source correct? And you did not think about that at all. You didn't think about I should go talk to the people who are actually in charge of these cases to find out the complete story?
I will tell you that court documents were reviewed yesterday during one of the points of orders, and in those court documents there were allegations of abuse merely because the parents did not align with the child's perceived gender.
Allegations.
Those were in the court documents.
Allegations, court documents from Texas.
I think it was Texas and one other case, and I can't remember the state, but there were actually copies of the court documents provided. Okay. And in those documents, it stated there were allegations of abuse because the mom and dad did not align with the child's perceived gender. So they were accused of abuse, they were accused of neglect, and there was an effort to remove their child simply because there was a difference in ideology.
And who provided those court documents?
Whoever raised the point.
Okay. Are those documents verified? Are they certified?
They're court documents, so
We,
I didn't go to the courthouse in the other state to see if they were in there, if that's what you're asking.
I don't know about other states, but in Texas, when you want to present a court document as a court document, it usually has to be certified because people can make those things up. People can edit them, people can change them. We've had that happen all the time.
Mr. Wu, if you don't believe the allegations, then vote against the bill.
No, I'm asking how you made your legislative decision. What is your intent on doing this? How you came to this conclusion, and whether or not your decision was arbitrary and capricious in coming up with this definition.
And I've said multiple times that there's been cases throughout the United States. You can Google it. There's cases in the state of Texas, and there's also a concern over actions that legislative bodies are taking to define this as abuse. So.
And
yeah.
I'm sorry. Were you finished?
Yes, sir.
Can you understand that often these types of cases are extremely complex, involve multiple people, and involve years of allegations, of different kinds of allegations in that? Can you understand that?
Of course.
Okay. Can you understand that some people in the case, one side may argue that it's being done for one reason, and the state may say, no, it's actually a whole big list of reasons. Is that something that you can comprehend?
Yes, but if you go back to the bill, and what the bill does, it just states that abuse and neglect does not include a refusal by a mom and dad to go along with the child's perceived gender. So yes, cases are complex, they take quite a bit of time, there's multiple individuals involved, but all this bill does is it provides clarity on the definitions of abuse and neglect, and that it does not include when a mom and dad refuse to abide by a child's perceived gender.
And yesterday when we did amendments, there was an amendment offered that would provide the other side of that equation, to say, like, if a parent does provide all these things, a parent does these things, that cannot be seen as child abuse either. And that amendment was rejected, correct?
All these things, I'm
sorry.
Be more
if
specific.
a parent provides affirming care to their child, their child says, I'm gay or I'm trans or whatever it is, that parent goes and provides them with the care they need, takes them to the doctor, takes them to the therapist, does all those things, provides them with outside care, that cannot be seen as child abuse.
That's not the intent of this bill. That's the exact opposite. So that's why that amendment was rejected.
You understand that was a different view from your bill, right?
And you understand that the purpose of this bill is to ensure the definition of abuse and neglect does not include refusal by a mom and dad to align with their child's perceived gender. So what the amendment you're referring to did not align with the intent of this bill.
Absolutely. So your intent is for the state to adopt this particular view of this issue. That's fair.
The intent of this bill is to ensure the definitions of abuse and neglect do not include the refusal of a mom and dad to go along with the perceived gender of their child.
And in our discussions, we have both discussed people, the possibility that the parents might be prosecuted for abuse and neglect for denying the care, and we talked about through the amendment the idea that people might be prosecuted for providing the care. You remember all those discussions?
My reference to those was the fact that there's other definitions with respect to abuse and neglect that have to do with the physical and mental abuse of the child. Those are already covered.
I'm sorry?
In the current definition of abuse and neglect in statute addresses mental abuse and physical abuse of a child.
Absolutely not what I'm asking about.
Those things are against the law already. So you have to go back to the intent of this legislation and what it does.
And that is exactly what I'm trying to get to. All I'm trying to say is asking you, you understand that on this question of whether it is abuse or not, that decision, whether it's abuse or not, the state saying that we are going to say this side of the equation is not abuse and neglect, that the parents who deny this care should not be care.
No, you're mischaracterizing the bill. It doesn't talk to anything about denying care. What it says is if there's an ideological difference
Absolutely.
between mom and dad and the child, they don't lose custody. If a child is not getting the care that they need, fed, shelter, what have you, that falls within the definition of neglect already. It's already in statute. This piece of legislation is specifically focused on making sure mom and dad don't lose custody of their child because there's a disagreement over ideology.
And we're protecting the people who over here who have this ideology, correct? That's all I'm asking.
And I'm answering your question multiple times.
This
I'm
law
I'm literally reading you pieces of the legislation as my response.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
But the legislation is in legal terms. The legislation isn't about prosecution. It's about investigation and things like that. In a practical sense, from a 20,000-foot view, we are saying that you can have two different philosophies about what happens in these type of cases, whether this type of treatment is abuse or not, right? Whether denying this treatment is abuse or not, whether providing this treatment is abuse or not. Your legislation says if you deny care, it is not abuse. It cannot be considered abuse.
I would strongly suggest you read the bill.
And what are the things in yours on your that your bill would say if you did these things, it is not abuse? What kind of things would those be?
Abuse does not include the refusal by a person responsible for a child's care, custody, or welfare to affirm a child's perception of the child's gender, including refusal to use a child's preferred name or pronoun, regardless of whether the child's name has been legally changed or a child's expressed sexual orientation. So any other concepts that you want to try to introduce with respect to mental abuse, physical abuse, they are covered in other areas of statute. I just read to you specifically what this bill has to deal with.
Let me just ask it in the exact terms of the bill.
Yeah.
If you're saying that if a parent does not affirm that is not child abuse, and under state law it cannot be considered child abuse.
That's what the bill says.
Okay. And if a parent does affirm, there's nothing to say that cannot be child abuse.
That's not the intent of this legislation.
Absolutely, that's all I wanted. Thank you very much.
That's not the intent of this legislation.
Ms. Goodwin, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for some questions?
Gentleman yield for questions?
Sure, I'd be happy
Gentleman
to.
yields.
Thank you, Representative. I'm sure that you heard the heart-wrenching speeches by Representative Jones and Representative Gonzalez.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand how your bill, should it become law, could harm some children?
Respectfully, this bill doesn't harm children. Those speeches were gut-wrenching, and no child should ever experience the abuse, both physical and mental, that were articulated on the floor. Those were horrific, and the parents should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, I thought that you might not see how your law would impact kids, but when I was listening to those stories, what I heard was because of a child's decision that they're gay, lesbian, transgender, what have you, they may face abuse in their own home. And that abuse should be something that is addressed.
Which is covered under current statute. If you look at the definition of abuse and neglect of a child, the examples that were articulated to you were examples. So under current statute, those stories that were articulated to the body, those were against the law currently. Nothing in this bill makes the physical and mental abuse of a child legal. It's illegal right now, and it'll be illegal tomorrow, and it'll be illegal after September 1 of this year.
You just mentioned the mental abuse. Sometimes it's hard to see mental abuse, and that mental abuse could be the denial of a child and how they...
Mom and dad disagreeing on a topic is not abuse. Children disagree with their moms and dads every day. That is not abuse.
I really believe that the consequence of your law could lead to some children remaining...
The consequences of my law will be families left intact, that
And that
children
could
will be
lead
left
to-
in, excuse me if I may finish, that children will be left in a loving environment with a mom and dad that loves them. And that's the intent of this law.
And that's a beautiful picture, and we all want that to happen in every family situation, but we know that that's not the reality. The reality is there are some families who deny their children who they are, and that escalates into physical abuse.
Which is against the law.
Correct. Thank you, Representative.
Mr. Speaker, I move passage.
Members, the question occurs on final passage of House Bill 1106. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Members, I'll give you time to get to your desk. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 85 ayes and 59 nays, House Bill 1106 is finally passed.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, I move that reduce to writing and place in a journal all conversations on House Bill
1106.
1106 on both second and third reading.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection to the adoption of the motion? Chair is not so ordered.
Mr. Guerin for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today we have Gabe's Burgers in the lounge for purchase. Thank you.